and share my screen. Hold on, I have to. Okay. Sorry. Okay, I have to quit free conference call for a second to get the screen recording to work, and then I'll be back. So don't leave anyone, okay? Sorry about that. I have a new computer and I didn't have it set up right to allow the recording to happen. So the recording is now happening. Yes, everyone should mute their mic, please. And if you don't, I can go ahead and let me just go ahead and mute everyone. Okay, I think everyone should be muted now. And I'm going to share my screen. And everybody should be able to see my screen now. And if you can't, put something in the chat and I will see what's going on. So today we are talking about data types and strings. There are 4 basic data types in Python. Tonight we're going to be basically concentrating on strings. That is the most complex data type, but it's also, unless you're doing a lot of mathematical stuff, it is the data type that you will probably use the most. And it's also a good introduction to collections, to sequences, because a string is simply a sequence of characters in a specific order. That's all it is in a spoken language, and that's all it is in Python. How you can manipulate it, how you can create it, those are all language specific. But a string, and when you go back to this, just always remember, a string is simply a series of characters in order. Now, a character can be a period, it can be a space, it can be something you cannot see on the screen. But they're all characters. There's something called the Ascii Table. I think we go through that a little bit in here. So a string is just a series of characters. Now, every character has a place in the string, and every place has an associated number. So the first place, if we're looking at Trish right here, T-R-I-S-H on your screen, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because there's a space after. That's what this little blank thing is on the end. Each of those letters has a position in the string, and each of those positions has an associated number. So the first character is a capital T, and the first position's number is 0. That can also be read as the index is 0. So you can call these numbers up here indices. So every letter has an index. And all the index is a number that denotes its position in the string. Now, something that oftentimes confuses new programmers is the fact that every single collection that is enumerated, like a list, like a string, starts with 0. It doesn't start with 1. So the first place in your string, the very first character, is going to have an index of 0, just like T does right here. The second character is always going to have an index of 1. So always remember that. Everything starts at 0. Nothing starts at 1. So that's what a string is. It's a sequence of characters in order. That order has an associated number, and that number is called an index. So what can I do with strings? I can do all kinds of things with strings. I can create a string. I can get the length of a string, which we'll see here in a second. I can not modify a string. Notice I just said not. Strings are what they call immutable, which means they're not modifiable. You can create another string from a string. There's all kinds of things to do that in Python. Python is spectacular at string manipulation, but you cannot actually go in and change the string itself. And what we're going to, here, let me create a little program. Close. I'm going to create a new Python file, and I will show you some of the stuff that I mean. And this is Pycharm, by the way. For anybody who has not played with it yet, you will need to play with it this week because this is going to be your assignment. So all I've done in Pycharm is I have created a .py file called simple_string.py. And all I'm going to do here is just create a simple string. And it's going to be a variable, Meister equals, this is a simple string. And let me configure the Python interpreter, because no matter what I do to these settings, it does not maintain my interpreter. Drives me nuts. Okay, so the Python interpreter is configured. So I have created a variable called Meister. I know it's a variable because it's on the left-hand side of a single equal sign. To the right, I have created a string. And that string just is, this is a simple string. Now, visually, how do I know that this is a string? I know it's a string because it's inside quotes. And it is started with a double quote and ended with a double quote. Now, the nice thing about Python is you can also do this with single quotes. So I can have Meister2 equals, this is another string. Now you'll see that I started this with a single quote and ended it with a single quote. And it's just as valid as the string on line 1. What I can't do is open it with a single quote and close it with a double quote. It won't work. Pycharm is nice because it's going to give me this red underline that says something's wrong here. What is wrong here is this string is not balanced. And by balanced, I mean it has the same opening type of quotation and the same closing type of quotation. So in this case, I'm opening with a single quote and I'm ending with a double quote. The way to fix this is simply to change one of them, and it doesn't matter which one. Sorry. There we go. So those are all strings. So what do I want to do when I'm talking about indexing? Well, let me just, I'm only going to play with Meister right now. So I'm just going to comment those guys out. And we know that the print function will print out something to the console. So if I say print Meister and I run this, let me set up a configuration here. Python Okay, there we go. And I run this. What I will see down here, this is the console window down here at the bottom, and it says this is a simple string. This print statement has caused this to print out. Now don't worry about this stuff up here because it's just stuff it's the metadata. It's information about the script. It's not what the script is doing. This is what the script is doing. So I just printed out a string. That's fine. Well, what if I only want to print out the very first character in this string? Well, what I can do is I can use the index. So what I have done is I have said, Python, print to the console the first character of Meister. And how did I do that? I use an open square bracket, that index number for the very first character, and a closed square bracket. You got to balance it. Everything has to be balanced in Python. So open square, closed square, and in the middle is the index number from the string. So if I run this again, I get a T. Now, I'm just going to do this for a couple of them. Now I'm just going to, all I'm doing here is changing the index. Oops. Oops. I can't seem to type. Okay. So if I run this again, all I've done is add a couple of lines, and I get THIS. Okay, and actually a space. There's a space there. So this is just a demonstration of how an index works with the string. And this is going to become very useful in the future. So we just talked about string indexing. And, okay. Concatenating strings. This is an important one because you're always going to be manipulating strings. String manipulation is very, very important. So what you can do to concatenate, or basically add two strings together, is you just can add them and they come into a new string. So if I want to concatenate Meister and Meister 2, I'm going to say another stir is Meister plus Meister 2. And I'm going to print another stir. So if I see that, I'm going to see this is a simple string, this is another string. And let me just show you the debugger really quick. There's something in Pycharm called the debugger, and that allows me to step through each individual line of code as I want to, as I need to. So I can see, in fact, what is happening. So if I hit this little debugger guy up here, and by the way, I've used debug all the time in my professional life as a coder. Understanding what is happening inside the code on every line is very helpful. So you'll notice down here, okay, there is this different window. I am on the Debugger tab, and the debugger basically will show me all the information. So on this blue line right here, it says module simple_string.py. That's the name of the file that I'm in. :1 means I'm at line 1. So I'm in simple_string.py and I'm at line 1. So how do I move to the next line? Well, these are the controls here. I can step over, I can step into, which we'll use when we get to functions later on in the class. I can step into my code. I can step out, or I can run to cursor. Right now we're going to step over, and you'll now see I'm at line 3. I'm at this print statement. So I've defined Meister. That's what I can see over here. Meister is of type string, and it just says this is a simple string. Now I'm going over here to console for a second, because right now all of this stuff right here is just stuff about the running program. It has nothing to do with what's going on inside your program. However, when I step over this print statement, by the way, you can always tell where you are by this blue line if you're in the debugger. This blue line right here tells you exactly where you are. So I'm going to step over, and you'll see that this is a simple string just printed because I executed line 3. So I'm just going to execute all these different lines, and I'll just continue until I get to line 14, just to show you how to do that. So if I go back to the debugger window, I have got, this is a simple string, this is another simple string. I'm at line 14, which I am. Now, you'll see in here under variables that another stir doesn't exist yet. Python knows nothing about another stir. It will know something once I've executed the line of code. And I haven't yet, but as soon as I hit this step over, it's going to execute that line of code. It creates another stir, which is of type stir. And it says this is a simple string, this is another string. And then it's going, you'll notice that nothing's happened here on the console yet. When I step over, I get my output, and I'm now done with the program. So that's how you concatenate strings. You add them together, just like you would add two integers. Now you cannot add an integer and a string. You can't add a float and a string. You can only add one string to another string. So let's see. List basics. So we're starting to talk about lists here because a string is a list. And so zyBooks thinks it's a good idea at this point to introduce you to basically to the concept of a list. And a list is simply a collection of things. Okay? It can be a collection of strings, a collection of integers, a collection of floats. A list can be a collection of other lists. So a list is basically a collection of things. So what do I do with a list? Well, I store things in it. When you are thinking about a list, let me get a new project here real quick. Sorry. Okay. Oh, I hate it when it does that. There we go. So I'm just going to create a file called simple list. So I said a string was a list, but a string is not, sorry, a string is immutable, which means you can't change it. A list, on the other hand, can be changed. So let's talk about how I create a list. We looked at how you create a string by just putting something in quotes. A list is different. I'm going to say my list. I'm going to say it equals open and close bracket. My list is a variable because it's on the left-hand side of a single equal sign. What's on the right-hand side of the single equal sign determines the type. And right now, if it begins with a left square bracket and it ends with a right square bracket, Python is always going to read that as either you're defining a list or you're trying to get at something in a list. Those are pretty much the two things. In this case, I'm defining an empty list. And just for comparisons, I'm going to run this and show you what an empty list looks like. So let me change my configuration real quick. Simple list. And I'm going to run this. So you will see that's what I get. Open and close parentheses. Well, how do I put something in a list? Well, I can put something in a list by just typing here. I can type the letter 42. I can type a name. I can type a float. I can type another name. I don't know what I'm going to type. And that, I have just entered 4 elements in a list. A piece of information that is stored in a list is often referred to as an element in the list. So I have 4 elements in the list, 42 lists, 20.2, and milli. So if I print my list, it's just going to show that. Now, what if I want to change something in this list? Well, I can simply say my list of, and maybe I mistyped list and I wanted Lisa. So list right here is at the second position of the list, the second position in the list. But it is index value of 1 because everything starts at 0. So I'm going to say my list of 1 is Lisa. And then I'm going to just print list again. Print my list. And you will see that I have changed list to Lisa with just this one little line of code. That's all I did, and it changed. So let's I'm just seeing if there's anything I specifically want to concatenating lists. There are lots of, this is what I wanted to do. There are lots of really handy methods that Python gives you for lists. And one of the things I do is I often Google things. Google is kind of the oracle of all things. And if I say Python list, oh, not a problem, Amanda. And please ask me any questions that you have. So there, W3 Schools and docs.python are 2 very, very accurate sources for information about Python. I tend to go to docs.python.org, but you can go to any one. The nice thing about this is you can do it if English is not your primary language. You can, in fact, change the language, and you can tell it what version you are using of Python, because some of the things change a little bit based on the versions. So a list is a data structure, and these are all the things you can do to a list. Just keeps on going. So we're only going to cover a few of them right now. You're going to learn a lot more about lists. There's a whole module on just lists and dictionaries. But if you're curious, this is a good place to start. So for what we're talking about, there's just a couple things that we want to talk about today. First, you can get the length of a list. Now this is going to come in really handy later on. And all you do is you use a function called len. So if I want the length of a list, if I want the length of my list, I'm just going to print so lengta space. So by the way, I'm using what's called a format specifier here, and the syntax that I'm using is a little bit old, but it's the syntax I'm used to. So what I'm doing here is I'm typing in a string, and then I have this open and close curly brackets inside the string. That tells Python that there's something else, it should not be printing that open curly bracket, close curly bracket, that there's going to be something else coming. That something else coming is in the form of a format specifier. So after the quote, you will see a dot format, open parentheses, and in this case, what I'm telling it to print is just the length of my list. And then, of course, everything has to be balanced, so I make sure I close all the parentheses. So if I run this again, it's going to say length of my list is 4. Now, it's nice because just like you can concatenate strings, you can concatenate lists. So if I create my list 2, and I put 42 life for any Douglas Adams fans out there, and if not, it's an obscure reference. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to, and I'm just going to do this. You could do a little bit simpler, but I'm going to do this and say added list equals plus my list 2. And then this, I'm just going to move this. And I'm going to say, I'm going to print added lists. Let me move this up here. I'm going to print list, and I'm going to, my apologies, the length of list is added list. So now let's see what happens, because really the only thing I've done is add 3 lines of code. Well, 4 lines. I created my list 2. And then I've added these other 3 lines of code where I add, whoops, almost had a problem here. There we go. Where I added, and you have to use the plus sign to add, 2 lists together, and then I'm going to print it, and then I'm going to print the length. So let's see what happens. So here is all of the stuff from before, okay? I have print my list, I changed list to Lisa, I printed my list, and I print the length. So all that was from before. This is the new stuff, and we'll see that added list, in fact, let me do this, print, that'll make it easier. Okay, so added list is, this is the line I'm looking at, and you'll see that all it did was take my list and my list 2 and concatenate them together. Basically appended my list 2 to my list and created a brand new list. Again, added lists is a variable. Whoops, I apologize for all that blue. We know it's a variable because it's on the left-hand side of a single equal sign. On the right-hand side of the single equal sign, we have 2 lists that we're adding. Now you have to make sure you're adding things of the same type. So adding a list and an integer together doesn't make sense. But adding a list to another list makes sense. So, and we use the len function. Len is how I get the length of the list. So if we go back here, we concatenated, we got the length. If you have values in a list, you can get the minimum, you can get the maximum, you can sum up everything in a list, you can find the index of the first element, you can count the number of occurrences of an element. So there's all kinds of things. And as I showed you here, there's way more than that. Okay, there's just so many things you can do with a list. And by the way, Python gives this all to you. It's just part of the language, and it's really nice. So let's see. Let's keep going. Named tuples. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but you have to remember I've never actually used a named tuple in my life in programming. So this is good to know, definitely good to read over, but I've never used it, and it's not something in this class that you're going to be using again. So, and I just wanted to give you that information so you don't spend a whole lot of time on things that you're not going to use later in the class. Understand that there is something called a named tuple, and it can be handy. It's a package you have to import. And if I were going to do a named tuple, I wouldn't do a named tuple. I would either create my own object or I'd make it a dictionary. So that's why I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on that. You just need to understand it well enough to do the challenge. Dictionaries. Dictionaries are the other, you just heard me talk about a dictionary. Dictionaries are the other big type of collection. So there are lists and there's dictionaries. Now a string is a type of a list, but you can't change it. It's immutable. A dictionary is a whole different kind of collection altogether. A dictionary does not have an index. There are no indexes in dictionaries. Dictionaries have name-value pairs. So this is basically an associative collection. Now I think dictionaries are great. Dictionaries are great because you can give meaning to a value. Let me show you what I mean. Let me create a new function, oops, nope. Sorry about that. New Python file. I'm going to call it simple dictionary. Okay? So a dictionary has a name-value pair. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to say dict is, now you'll notice something. A list has square brackets. A dictionary has curly brackets. Now, don't get these curly brackets confused with the curly brackets in a format specifier. These curly brackets, when they're not inside a quote, are creating a dictionary. That's what it's telling Python to do. So I'm going to say name, colon, sorry, quote name, colon, pizza. So what have I just done here? I have created a key, and the key is always to the left of the colon, and the value is always to the right. It's always key, colon, value. That never changes. I have told Python that I have a dictionary. That's what those curly braces have told it. That dictionary is going to be referenced with the variable name dict, and I have a key, which is the string name, and a value, which is the string Lisa. Now, I can put all kinds of things in a dictionary. I can say page 29, don't I wish? I can say, let's see, money will be $1.02. So I can put anything in here. I can make the key and the value whatever I want. The nice thing about this is because I now have meaning with my variable. It's not just a 1 or a 2 or a 3 like an index is in a list. And by the way, Lists have a really big place, and dictionaries have their own place too. But I don't want you to get the two confused, okay? Lists have index values, dictionary has key value pairs. So what can I do with a dictionary? Well, I can print it. Oops. So all I have here is I have this list, this dictionary, and I'm going to print out the dictionary. So let me change the configuration. And I'm going to run this. So that's all I've done. I created a dictionary and I printed it out. Just like everything else in Python, you can print most of it out. So let's see, name value pairs, curly braces. Let's see, I think I want to do one of these challenges. Okay, so modify and add to a dictionary. So you can change a dictionary, you can add something to a dictionary, you can remove things from a dictionary, and you can get at things in a dictionary. Well, we know with lists that we can get at things using the index value. How do I get a piece of information from a dictionary? Well, this is how I do it. I can simply use the key to get to the value. So I'm going to say key of name has value of so what I've done here is I've just put it in a print statement. Key of name has value of, and then I'm going to open and close the curly braces. Now again, these curly braces are not the same as those curly braces. These are inside quotes, so it's telling Python to do something different than if they're not inside quotes. So I'm going to run this, and it says the value of the key of name has value of Lisa. I could have made that a little bit. Key name has value. Let's do that because I didn't like the way I put that. Key name has value Lisa. Okay? So that's how I get at it. Instead of having an index, 0, 1, 2, I have a key. And I can do this for any of the elements in the dictionary. So my key of age, I'm just going to change age here, and I'm going to print it, and key age has value of 29. So that is how you get at data. It's called an accessor. That's how you access it. So let's see. They want to change something. Well, changing is actually very easy. So I have created a dictionary. I've printed a dictionary. I have printed information from a dictionary. Now I want to change something in the dictionary. So what am I going to do to change it? Well, I am just going to use that key and set that key to a different value. So I'm going to say dict of name is going to equal Pam. Okay? And if I go then and just print, actually let me copy this. So the only thing I've done new is I've changed name to Pam, and I'm going to print it. I'm just copying that print statement. Didn't change it at all. So now it says dict name is Pam. That's because I changed the value. I didn't change the key. I didn't have to. So basically, it overwrote Lisa and put Pam into that dictionary by doing this. Let's see. We can do this challenge really quick. What time is it? I wanted to make sure we got to the labs and we talked about them. So let's keep going, and if I can circle back and do a challenge, I will, but I want to talk about the labs. So we have two numeric types, ints and floats. An int is just that. An int is a number without a decimal place. A float is a number with a decimal place. And so these are container sequence mapping types. Okay, so we have a string, we have a list, we have a tuple, we have a set, and we have a dictionary. We're worried about string, lists, and dictionaries. That's what we're worried about. I'm not going to worry about tuple, and we don't really use sets in this class. So choosing a container type. For me, choosing a container type is about what does the data itself need. Is it just data and I don't care about an association? If there is an association, or I'm going to need to maintain some form of association with my data, then I'm going to use a dictionary. If I'm not, then I'm going to use a list. A list is much simpler. It's a much simpler data structure, and some people say it's faster. A dictionary is a more complex data structure. It takes more time to manage it, but it can save you a lot in the long run if you set it up right. I use lists and I use dictionaries all the time because programming is about managing data. A program doesn't just run to run. Not even your favorite game just runs to run. There is so much data in the background. So understanding which container type is the best will be very important. So this is just an additional practice on grade calculations. Type conversions. You can convert one type to another. There's implicit and explicit. Implicit is if you add an integer and a float, it becomes a float. That's all there is to it. And this is just the standard rule. Int plus int is int. Anything plus a float is a float. It's just that simple. So that is an implicit conversion. Now there are explicit conversions, and they're called conversion functions. You can convert something to an integer, to a float, or to a string. Now, it can be a little tricky, and you can get some very interesting errors. Thank you very much. You can get some very interesting errors. So let me show you where some of the pitfalls of conversion is. Okay. So I'm just going to create something called conversion, and I am going to say my int is 42, my stir is, this is a string, and my float is 1.02. Okay, so I have three things. Well, let's see what happens when I try adding some things together. If I say my stir plus my int, what do we think is going to happen? Well, let's run it and see. Because the nice thing about Pycharm is not going to hurt anything. You can just run it and see if you get any errors. So that's that. I'm going to run this, and I get an error. This type error means that I cannot add or concatenate the things that I want to concatenate. I cannot concatenate a string and an integer. Python just won't let me. It has no clue what to do with it, and it throws up its hands and says, sorry, and you're going to get something like this. Don't let this worry, because that's what these things are for, these conversion functions. So if for some reason I want to add an integer and a string, I just turn the integer into a string using the stir function. Okay? And when I do this, I get string 42. It works. No big red marks come out. So that is how to convert an integer to a string. Now, one thing that you are going to have to do is you're going to have to do a lot of converting strings to int. Why is that? Well, that's because you're going to be using input statements. And I'm going to say in1 equals input and integer. integer. And then I'm going to say in2 input another integer. Okay? Now, I want to show you what's going to happen. Because, first of all, I'm going to print in1 plus in2. And what we think is going to happen isn't going to happen. So I'm going to run this. Now let's say input an integer, and I'm going to put 3, and input another integer, and I'm going to put 4, and I get 34. And I guarantee you 3 plus 4 is not 34. It's been a while since I've taken math, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct on this one. So what happened? Well, let's go back to our debugger. Okay? So we're going to debug. Now, I set, by the way, that red dot is a breakpoint. I set the breakpoint at line 7 because I didn't need to look at the other things. So I'm going to step over. I'm going to go to the console, and I'm going to put an integer in, and my integer is going to be 3. And now I'm at line 8. I'm going to step over. It's going to wait for me to put in another integer, and I'm going to put 4. Now I've stopped here on purpose. I'm going to go back to the debugger because you will see in1 and in2 are of type string. Every single thing in Python is a string unless you do something to tell Python it's not. So my int and my float, Python already knows. 42, it's not in quotes, it's an integer. 1.02, it's not in quotes, it's a float. But if you are getting data from outside the script into the script, into your Python, which is what I did with these input statements, you're getting a string. Simple as that. Python will always give you a string. So what in the world do you do if you don't want 34 to be the answer of what's 3 plus 4? You convert them. So what you can do is there's one of two ways to do this. What most people do is they just put the conversion right around the input. But you can also do it here. So all I did was add this, int, open parentheses. This whole input thing is the parameter in the function, and then I close the parenthesis. And here I just put variable in2 inside the call to int. This will go out and it will change my integer, sorry, it will change my string into an integer. You're going to have to do this a lot. So this is your friend. So if I run this again, I'm going to say, 3, I'm going to say 4, and lo and behold, I get 7. The only thing I did was I used the int function to convert a string to an integer. And every time you have an input statement, you are going to get a string. Now that string may represent an integer, may represent a float, it may represent a list, it may represent a dictionary. But in the beginning, Python is going to give it to you as a string, and you're going to have to convert that string. So that's something to remember now, and as you start working towards your projects. So let's see, string formatting, format specifiers. You can do a lot with string formatting in Python. And I showed you this just a little bit ago, dot format. So here we have a string, and we have 1, 0, and 2. And it is positional. Positional replacement is what they're talking about here. And inferred inferred replacement is here. And all you're doing is you're taking this and you're going to put it here, as opposed to taking this and putting it here. So I'll show you what we mean really quick. File. I'm just going to call this format. So I'm going to show you positional replacement. So I'm just going to have var 1, position 1, var 2, var 3 is position 3. Whoops, gotta do that right. Okay, so I'm going to do, I've just got 3 variables. So I'm going to do positional replacement. So I'm going to have, I'm just going to print it because it's easier to see if you print it. And I'm going to say 0, 1, 2. Dot format var 1, var 2, var 3. So when I run this, I'm going to be shown what the positions are because of the way I put the information in the variables. But I did that on purpose because I want you to see what's going to happen when I change it. Okay. So I'm just going to run this, and we got position 1, position 2, position 3. That's fine. So now, what if I do this? Okay, instead of this, I do this. Position 1, position 0. Let's see what happens. The only thing I've done is change 0 to 1 and 1 to 0. And I get position 2, position 1, position 3. Something changed. What changed and why? So I have it var 1, var 2, and var 3. So in the first line, this is 0, this is 1, and this is 2. 0, 1, and 2. It's positional. Again, everything starts at 0. So 0 to 0, 1 to 1, 2 to 2. But here on line 10, I've swapped something. What have I swapped? I put 1 here and 0 here. So this is 0 still. It's the 0 parameter. And it's going to find 0. var 2 is in the 1 position, it's going to find the 1. var 3 is in the 2 position, it's going to find the 2. That's positional replacement. And you'll notice that there are numbers in between the curly brackets. The other kind of replacement is what they call inferred positional replacement. And then there's named replacement, which you can do as well. We're not going to really go into that because most of what we do isn't named replacement, and I try not to go too far over. So the inferred replacement, basically it doesn't have the curly brackets. So instead, sorry, it doesn't have the numbers. So I have a place here, a place here, and a place there. And you've seen me do this already with just a single curly bracket. So if I print this, this line is the same as this line. But there's no numbers, so how do I change an inferred replacement? Very simple. I just change the variable names. There's still 3 spaces here. But there's still 3 things here, but I've just moved the variables around. So when I print it, I get position 3, position 2, position 1. Now, one other thing I want to show you really quick. what happens if I do that? Okay, and I run it. I now have an error. Okay, the error says, it's an index error, replacement index 2 out of range for positional args tuple. What in the world does that mean? What it means is that I've told Python right here, I'm going to have 3 things for it to replace. 3 items exactly. But here I've only given it 2. I've only given it 2 variables. So Python says, you told me you were going to give me 3. You only gave me 2. So I'm going to throw up my hands and say I can't do anything. That's what all that red means. Python has thrown up its hands. So how do you correct this problem? One of 2 ways. You either add a variable here, like we have in line 13, or you remove one of those. Either of those 2 is a correct answer, depending on your problem, and when you run it, it will be okay. What I wanted to show you was that index error, because a lot of people, when they're doing string formatting for the first time, run into that, and they're not quite sure what in the world to do. Okay, so this is more referencing format values correctly right here. You're going to have to do labs that they're going to want you to print a $sign in front of something and put 2 decimal places after it. This is the format specifier for it, right there. Okay? So it will always print $sign, then it will print whatever the whole part of the number is, and it will only ever print 2 places after the decimal place. So I just wanted to show you that really quick. Okay, you can do a lot of advanced formatting with strings. You can use tabs, you can use new lines, you can do all kinds of things. And it really can be fun to play with. There are whole kinds of puzzles you can do with string formatting. Basically, you just have to remember that the page is a matrix of rows and columns. And every time you put a letter someplace, you're sticking it in an intersection of a row and a column. Let's see. String slicing. So you can slice strings. Basically what you can do is you can use a specific notation, and this is the notation, the slicing notation, and you can say, take this chunk of data out of this string and give me a brand new string with just that chunk of data. This can be very helpful if you have fixed format data. So if you know that between characters 3 and characters 42, you're going to have a chunk of information that you want to get at, string slicing is what will do it for you. And it's very handy and it's very quick. And speaking of quick, it is always going to be faster to allow a Python function that was built to do something like string slicing or sorting a list. It will always be faster to have Python do it in the language function that it gave you, rather than you trying to write it yourself. So if you're concerned of whether or not Python already does something, then go out and look at Google, because it can tell you. And so basically all string slicing is this, okay? You have a start and an end. That's what you have. So if you look, let me make this a little bigger. If you look at my_str, you have 0:2. What does that tell Python? Actually, you have open square bracket, 0:2, close square bracket. Open square bracket, close square bracket is something to do with a collection. And in this case, if you've got a number colon another number, it's having to do with a list. So in this case, our list is a string. And what you want to do is you want to get from index 0 2 places. So 0 and 1. It won't get the 2, it's just going to get the 0 and 1. So it's DO. So for the next one, it's 0, 6, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it won't get the 6. So that's what string slicing does. It's very handy and it's very fast if you have fixed format data. String methods. There are lots of things you can do on strings. So let's do this. Let's just look for Python strings. So let's go back to, where is my Python? Docs.python. Strings. Again, these are all the things you can do. Is this one I want? String commands, string operations. Yes. This is all the things you can do with a string. More than we could ever cover in this class. However, it's all out here for you, and they give you examples. Let's see. Templates, format, string syntax, regular expressions. So yes. And it's in the string.py, which comes with the program anyway. So you can replace things in a string, but when you look at replace with a string, I just wanted to mention this. You always are going to replace. You're never really replacing. A replace doesn't replace. A replace creates a new string, always, in Python. When you are dealing with a string, you are acting, you're doing something that modifies that string, Python is always going to create a new string, which is why when you look at this line of Python code, it says phrase equals phrase.replace 1 uno. That you have to have that phrase on the left-hand side of single equal sign, because this replace creates a new string. So what Python's going to do is it's going to create a brand new string from this and put it in phrase. So that's why you have to be careful. Even though it says replace, it's not really replacing in the existing string. It's replacing and creating a new string. Okay, let's see. Again, all of these, you can go over these. All of these are really, really good comparing strings. We should do something about that. Okay, you can see if two strings are equivalent. Okay? Equivalent just means they're identical. They have all the same letters or numbers or characters in the same order on both sides, on the left-hand and the right-hand side of the comparator. And we're going to learn more about comparing next week. So this is just a slight introduction, and you're really not going to need to know a lot about this. Just know that you can compare them, and next week we're going to get into all kinds of comparisons because we're going to be doing if, else, elif statements. Splitting and joining strings. Again, you have a split method and you can add two strings together. A split is really good when you're dealing with a string you want to convert to a list. I know I'm going through the rest of this fast. Name format. Let's talk a little bit about this. I promise if you need to go, go ahead. This one I'm going to give you the answer to, because you need an if statement to do this. And the school knows I've done this. Some of the professors might get irritated with me, but unless you understand what an if statement is, you can't get this right. So something we will cover next week makes this doable. So what you need to do here, let me just copy this in. And in fact, I may have this already, but what is this, lab 2.12. So let me just make this a comment. So basically what we're doing here is we're taking data and we're going to change its format. So somebody's going to put in a first name, a middle name, and a last name. And the output is going to be last name, comma, first initial, dot, middle initial, period. So what am I going to do here? Well, I'm going to do a couple input statements. I'm going to do first name equals input, middle name equals input, and last name input. So these are three input statements where I'm going to get data. So I'm just going to start by printing them all out. I'm going to say first name, middle name, last name. First name, middle name, last name. So let me just run this and we will start. Now I do programming in kind of baby steps. So I always start off like this and then I build up to my my final product. And I do this at work, not just at school. So I'm going to run lab 2.12 and it's waiting for me to do an input. So I'm going to say Lisa and it's going to print out Lisa and Shannon. But that's not really what we're asking for. It says it's going to do last name, first initial, middle initial. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to do a format, but the format is going to be first name, It's last name, first initial, middle initial. So I'm going to say last name, first initial, and middle initial. Okay? And it's going to be last name, comma, space, first name, period, middle initial, period. So period, period. So this is where that format specifier comes in handy. You'll notice that I'm doing all of that in a single print statement. So I'm going to say Lisa, whoops, nope. And it comes out Shannon, Lisa, A. That's perfect. And that's easy. You didn't need anything else. Here's the next part. The next part says, if it's just first name and last name, then the output is last name, comma, first initial, period. Well, how in the world do you know the difference? This is where you have to have something that you have never done before. This is where you have to say, if middle name is empty, then first name else you do this. This is why I give you the answer, because you cannot do this without knowing if and else, and we don't cover that till next week. So change your variable names, do whatever, but this is what you'll do. So if I do it the first way, I get what I had before. If I do it the other way, first name, nothing for the middle name, I get Shannon L. So this is why I give you that answer. And I'm going to post this on the Google Drive. And if your teachers get upset with you, send them to me, because I've already talked to the dean about this and the fact that this is just not fair. And this is the only one I will do this for through the entire term. So count characters. Count characters is easy because you just need to remember len, L-E-N, okay? And that's all you want to do here. A program whose input is a string which contains a character and a phrase, and whose output indicates the number of times the character appears in the phrase. Oh, yeah. Let me go back, and that is actually a string function. I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. But we can go back and look, because this is, in fact, just a string function. You don't have to do any of this yourself. I just have to, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Splitting and joining, string methods. So here, finding and replacing. Find X returns the index. Reverse find count. This is what you have to do there. Count X returns the number of times X occurs in the string. So for this, for the next lab, you're going to want to do count. So name format we already did. Lab count, you're going to need to say string dot count and then the letter. Okay? So if you're confused about this one, go back and look at the count function under string functions. Okay, creating passwords. This one is similar, but it's all about formatting and replacement. Let's see. Prompt the user to enter 2 words, a number and a number, storing each into separate variables, which is fine. So those are just input statements. Output those 3 values on a single line separated by a space. Okay, so you're going to take all of these and you're going to print them out. You're going to want to make sure that you use the format specifier, and you can just use the indirect replacement. And then they want you to output 2 passwords using the combination of the user input. So the first password is going to be the first word underscore the second word, again, just replacement. And the second password is going to be the number, the first word, and then the number again. And again, this is just indirect replacement. That's all it is the print with the formats in it. And that is also what this is. This says number of characters, so that is just len. So you're getting the length of the string. And they give you a bit of a start here. So I know we went a bit over, and I apologize. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, if nobody has any questions, I'm going to call it. I will post the recording sometime tomorrow along with the scripts that we did, and I will send that. If you're in my class, the announcement will show up tomorrow. If not, I will be sending the announcement out to all the other teachers. And yeah, hope to see you here next week. As far as I know, I'll be here on Thursday, but I'll be putting out an announcement. Have a good night, everyone. Was I recording?